You ever have someone think they own something that's clearly yours, and then act like you're the one trespassing? Yeah, that's exactly what happened when my HOA decided they somehow had the right to build 50 lakefront cabins on my private island. That's right, my land. The land my grandfather bought with his hard-earned money decades ago. A piece of family history, peaceful, quiet, and private. The kind of place where you go to breathe when the world gets too loud. They must have thought I wouldn't notice. Oh, but I did. I let them finish every inch of their precious community project, right down to the fancy carved sign at the dock entrance. Then, when the time was right, I walked straight into court with the original deed in my hand. But we'll get there. Let me start from the beginning. I live near a lake, a gorgeous one, smooth as glass in the morning, surrounded by tall pines that whisper when the wind hits them. It's not some public tourist trap. It used to be family-owned property, generations deep. My grandfather bought a big chunk of it back in the day and later divided it among his kids. My share? A small 6-acre island sitting just off the mainland, close enough to reach by boat, far enough to feel like my own world. I'd grown up spending weekends there, fishing at sunrise, kayaking across the calm water, or just sitting on the old dock watching the sunset fade into the trees. It wasn't just land to me. It was part of my family's legacy. When the nearby neighborhood developed into a fancy HOA community, my island sat right next to their boundary line. They managed the mainland, but my island was outside their jurisdiction. The county maps showed that crystal clear. So did the deed and the original property surveys. But apparently, clear legal boundaries don't mean much to people who think power makes them right, and that's where Karen came in. If you've ever met a Karen in charge of something, you already know the type. Perfectly styled hair, loud voice, and that forced smile that hides 1,000 threats. She was the HOA president, which basically meant she thought she ruled the lake. The first time we met, she strutted down to my dock like she was marching into enemy territory. I was unloading lumber from my boat when she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, arms crossed, chin up like she was giving orders. "You can't just build random structures on community property without approval." I stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing. "Community property?" I said. "Lady, this is my island." She blinked, genuinely confused, like I'd told her I was building on Mars. "Well, we'll see about that," she huffed. "Everything within the lake boundary falls under HOA jurisdiction." "Check the county records," I said, trying to keep calm. "You'll see this land isn't yours." She waved her hand like I was wasting her time and stomped back toward the mainland. I figured that was the end of it. Spoiler alert, it definitely wasn't. Over the next few months, I started noticing strange things. HOA contractors began showing up near the shore. First with survey equipment, then with trucks unloading materials. I thought maybe they were just fixing their dock. But one morning, I looked out from my window and froze. Barges, several of them. Moving toward my island, I jumped in my boat and motored over. Construction crews were unloading equipment, power tools, lumber, even prefab panels. I shouted over the noise, "What the hell are you doing?" One of the foremen looked up, clipboard in hand, and said, "Building Phase 1 of the HOA's Lakeside Expansion Project." "What expansion project?" I demanded. "The community cabins," he said matter-of-factly. "We've got permits." I snatched the clipboard and scanned the paperwork. The permits were for Lot 42, the last piece of HOA property before the lake. My island wasn't even mentioned. "Who authorized this?" I asked. He shrugged. "HOA president said this is community land. We're just following orders." My blood boiled. That afternoon, I stormed to Karen's house, still covered in mud and lake water. She opened the door, gave me one of those fake smiles, and said, "Can I help you?" "You're building on my property," I said, keeping my voice level. "You need to stop. Immediately." Her lips curled into a smirk. "We have full rights to the lake perimeter," she said. "And that includes the island." I handed her a copy of my deed. "Read this. My family's owned that island since before your HOA even existed." She barely glanced at it. "Our legal team already reviewed the maps. The island's public. If you have concerns, take it up with the board." Fine, I thought. I'll do exactly that. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with every document I had, the original deed, county maps, aerial surveys, everything. Karen sat in the center like a queen on her throne, surrounded by her loyal board members. I explained my case calmly, showed the paperwork, even pointed out the exact property lines on the map. Karen smiled that same smug smile. "Well, that's all very interesting," she said. "But the HOA operates under community development zoning. The lake is considered part of the shared environment. Therefore, all structures must comply with our standards." Translation? She was twisting environmental rules to claim ownership of my land. Then came the vote. The board, every single one of them, sided with her. They told me to stop interfering with community projects. At that point, I had two options: lawyer up immediately or wait, and I decided to wait, because I knew how these things worked. The HOA was acting like a business, pouring money into a project that wasn't legally theirs, and the more they built, the deeper they'd sink. So, I let them build. Over the next few months, I watched them transform my quiet island into a construction site. They cleared trees, poured concrete, installed plumbing, and built docks on both sides. It was like watching someone redecorate your house without permission. But I kept quiet. I collected everything: photos, permits, emails, newsletters, even had a friend in the county zoning office confirm what I already knew. None of their filings mentioned my island. Everything they were building was technically illegal. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around the neighborhood like she'd just built Disneyland. HOA newsletters bragged about Phase 1 of the lakeside resort. She even hosted tours, showing off the future community getaway cabins. Every time I saw her, she'd smirk and say, "You should thank us. Your little patch of dirt is finally being put to good use." I just smiled. "Can't wait to see the final product," I'd say, and deep down, I meant it. Because once they finished, that's when I'd make my move. Fast forward about 9 months, and my island didn't even look like my island anymore. What used to be a quiet stretch of green, with birds nesting in the trees and waves brushing against the dock, was now a fully developed HOA paradise. They'd poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. Brand new wooden cabins, outdoor grills, string lights, docks, pathways, even a reception hut by the shoreline. Every weekend, HOA members came over for inspection tours, smiling, taking photos, talking about how this community project would increase property values for everyone. And through it all, Karen, queen of the HOA, paraded around in her designer sunglasses, taking full credit for everything. She'd stand near the entrance where the new "Welcome to Lakeview HOA Cabin" sign was being installed, hands on her hips, smiling for cameras. "We're turning this into the crown jewel of our neighborhood," she'd say. Every time I saw her, I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled politely, waved from my boat, and said, "Looking good, Karen?" Because I was playing a longer game. See, the HOA thought they'd won. They thought I was just some pushover property owner who couldn't afford a fight. But what they didn't know was that I was documenting everything. Every phase, every piece of construction, every permit number that didn't match up. I had an entire digital folder named HOA Disaster Files ready for the day they'd regret underestimating me. While they kept building, I reached out to a friend who worked in the county recorder's office. He owed me a few favors, and I asked him to pull every single file, permit, and map related to that project. It took him a few days. But when he called back, his words confirmed everything. "Bro," he said, "they've got no record of your island. Every permit they filed stops at Lot 42. They never even included your property coordinates." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning," he said, "everything they've built is illegal. Every single thing." I could practically feel my blood pressure drop. Not from anger this time, but satisfaction. The HOA was knee-deep in violations and didn't even know it. So I waited. By late spring, the island looked complete. The HOA hosted a massive ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local news came out. Karen wore her brightest red blazer, her pearls shining, smiling like a movie star. There was a live band, speeches, even a champagne toast. I watched the whole thing from my boat at a distance. It was surreal. They were celebrating my land like it was theirs. The next morning, I called my attorney, an old family friend named Robert who'd been handling our property matters for decades. I told him everything, Sent him every file, every photo, every permit copy, and every screenshot of HOA newsletters bragging about the Lakeview cabins. He called me back the same day. "This is solid, son. You've got them cornered." "Good," I said. "Then it's time." That weekend, Robert and I took a little boat ride to the island. We walked around, documenting every square inch, photos, videos, drones, everything. We even made sure to get close-ups of the HOA sign and the cabin's plaques that listed the HOA's name on them. When we were done, Robert grinned. "They're done for." We went straight to the county office and filed a formal property encroachment complaint, attaching every document we had. Robert drafted a cease and desist letter so airtight that even breathing near my island without permission would be a violation. A week later, Karen and the HOA board received a thick envelope. Inside was the cease and desist, a list of 52 property violations, and a demand for immediate removal or compensation for every structure on the island. My phone rang that same evening. Karen's number, I answered casually. "Hey, Karen, enjoying the new cabins?" Her voice was sharp. "What is this letter, huh? You're threatening the community?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting my property. You built 50 cabins on private land. That's not community work. That's criminal trespassing and illegal construction." She tried to keep her voice steady, but I could hear the panic slipping through. "Our legal team will handle this." "Good," I said, smiling. "See you in court." The next few weeks were chaos in the neighborhood. HOA newsletters stopped going out. The project's Facebook page disappeared. Residents started whispering. People wanted to know why the grand opening suddenly got postponed indefinitely. Karen stopped smiling. Every time she drove by, she avoided eye contact. The once proud president of the HOA was now scrambling, trying to find a way to fix a problem she didn't even understand fully. Meanwhile, I kept everything professional. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I just let the process unfold. Because once lawyers and judges got involved, the facts would speak for themselves. The court date came faster than anyone expected. Word spread like wildfire through the community. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. HOA members, residents, reporters, even curious neighbors from other communities who'd heard the story. Karen walked in wearing that same red power blazer, pearls perfectly aligned, face pale but posture proud. She glanced at me once, then quickly looked away. The judge called the session to order. Case 24-1987, Daniels versus Lakeview HOA. Robert stood tall beside me, calm, confident. The judge looked our way. "Mr. Daniels, you're the plaintiff." "Please proceed." Robert began by laying out the timeline. Clear, factual, and devastating. He showed the original deed from my grandfather, dated 1973, the official survey map stamped by the county, the satellite images showing my island separate from HOA land. Then he displayed the construction permits that clearly stopped, short of the island. Every slide hit like a hammer. The courtroom murmured as the reality set in. Then it was Karen's turn. She stood up and gave a speech that sounded like it had been rehearsed. In front of a mirror, "Your Honor," she began, "the HOA acted in good faith under the assumption that the land in question was community-owned. The plaintiff has provided no clear boundary lines, and the association merely sought to improve the shared environment." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you verify ownership with the county before beginning construction?" Karen hesitated. "We consulted our planning committee." The judge frowned. "In other words, you assumed." Karen's lawyer tried to jump in, but the judge cut him off. Robert stepped forward again. "Your Honor, not only did they assume, they ignored written warnings. We have emails showing Mr. Daniels explicitly told the HOA president that the island was private land. They proceeded anyway." The judge nodded slowly, flipping through the documents. The tension in the room could be felt in the air. Then he turned to Karen. "Did you or your organization at any point obtain written permission from the plaintiff to build on this land?" Karen's voice cracked. "No, Your Honor." And that was the moment everything crumbled for her. The judge leaned back, sighed, and said, The HOA has committed extensive trespass and illegal use of private property. The plaintiff retains full ownership of the land, and any structures must be removed or compensated at fair market value. Karen gasped. Removed? You can't be serious! The judge's tone sharpened. Mrs. Daniels, your organization violated state property laws. You should consider yourself fortunate if you're not facing criminal charges. The room went dead silent. I didn't say a word. Just looked at her, then at the board members sitting behind her, most of whom suddenly looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. When the judge's gavel hit the bench, the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Karen's face went pale, her perfect confidence cracking for the first time. The once smug HOA president who strutted around like a queen had just been publicly dethroned. The judge's words kept replaying in my head. The HOA has committed extensive trespass and illegal use of private land. The plaintiff retains full ownership, and any structures must be removed or compensated at fair market value. Every person in that room felt it. The shock, the disbelief, and the realization that Karen had led them straight into disaster. For a few seconds, the place stayed completely silent. Then the whispers started, quiet at first, but growing like ripples in the water. HOA members looking at one another, murmuring, shaking their heads. Karen just stood frozen, clutching her folder of documents that suddenly meant nothing. The judge cleared his throat. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to discuss the matter of damages and resolution. Court is adjourned. He banged the gavel again, and that was it. As soon as we stepped out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed us. Apparently, someone had leaked the story, and the local press was eating it up. Cameras, microphones, questions flying from every direction. Sir, is it true the HOA built on your land without permission? How much are you seeking in damages? What happens to the cabins now? Robert, my attorney, stayed calm. All will be handled through the proper legal process, he said professionally. Karen tried to leave quietly, but the cameras caught her. One reporter shouted, Mrs. Daniels, do you have any comment on the judge's ruling? She didn't answer, just kept walking, her high heels clacking on the courthouse steps as she disappeared into her car. Over the next few days, the community went into absolute meltdown. HOA members flooded the office demanding answers. Emails leaked, revealing that Karen had pushed the project through without full board approval. Apparently, she'd even promised certain investors a share of profits from future cabin rentals, profits she never had the right to promise. The more people dug, the uglier it got. Turns out she'd used community funds to pay for part of the project, including landscaping, dock materials, and cabin furniture, without ever disclosing it in the HOA's budget meetings. Basically, she'd built an empire on someone else's land using other people's money. The fallout was brutal. Within a week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I wasn't invited, but several residents later told me what went down. The boardroom was packed. Karen tried to defend herself, blaming miscommunication and inaccurate county records, but no one was buying it. The treasurer stood up and showed invoices, thousands of dollars in unexplained expenses, authorized under her signature. By the end of the night, the board voted her out unanimously. Karen Daniels, Queen of the Lake, was officially dethroned. When the news spread, it hit every corner of the neighborhood. Some people were furious, others just embarrassed. A few even came by my dock in person to apologize for the mess. A few days later, I got a call from the new HOA president, a calm, soft-spoken guy named Mark. He sounded nervous. Mr. Daniels, first of all, I want to apologize for everything that's happened. None of us knew the extent of Karen's decisions until now. We want to make things right. I appreciate that, I said. What's your proposal? He sighed. We'd like to buy the island outright. Full ownership transfer, fair market value, just to put this behind us. I thought about it for a long second, staring out at the island from my porch. The cabins looked peaceful from here. Lights off, empty, silent. But after everything that happened, I realized something. Selling it would feel like giving up, so I said, no sale. But I'm open to renting it to you. He hesitated. Renting? Yep. You already built your little resort, I said. So here's the deal. You lease the island from me. You pay monthly rent, cover maintenance, property taxes, and in return, your members can use the cabins under my ownership. It went quiet on the phone for a second. Then he said, "Honestly, that might work." A week later, we met in person with our lawyers and drew up a formal lease agreement. The terms were simple. The HOA would pay me a monthly fee for the use of the island and cabins. I'd retain full ownership of the property. Any damages, repairs, or maintenance costs were their responsibility, and the court would approve the agreement as part of the settlement. When the papers were signed, Mark extended his hand. "Mr. Daniels, again, I'm sorry this happened. I hope this brings some peace." I shook his hand and nodded. "It does. Just make sure your HOA never forgets the difference between community property and private ownership again." Karen, meanwhile, didn't show her face again. Word around the neighborhood was that she'd sold her house and moved out of state. Some said she took an early retirement. Others claimed she was fighting another lawsuit somewhere else. Honestly, I didn't care. She'd spent years building her reputation as the lady who gets things done. But in the end, her biggest project became her downfall. A few months passed. The lease payments rolled in every month, right on time. The cabin started attracting families, tourists, and even local fishermen looking for weekend getaways. Ironically, the project Karen had fought for so arrogantly ended up becoming something positive. Under my ownership. I didn't just leave the place as it was. I worked with a local conservation group to make sure the island stayed eco-friendly. We added solar panels, recycling stations, and even a small nature trail that wound through the trees. I also donated a portion of the profits to wildlife conservation around the lake. The HOA members, once furious, now loved it. The cabins boosted tourism, improved local property values, and created a genuine community spot that actually benefited everyone. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'd take my boat out and circle the island. The cabins would be glowing softly with warm light, laughter echoing across the water, kids roasting marshmallows by the fire pits. It was beautiful. Peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. And every time I'd see that Lakeview Cabins sign still standing proudly at the dock, I'd smile to myself because the irony never got old. They built it thinking it was theirs. Now they paid me to use it. Justice had a funny way of coming full circle. Karen's arrogance had been her undoing. All she had to do was check the deed, a single piece of paper that could have saved her career, her reputation, and her pride. But instead, she gambled with something that wasn't hers, and lost. Months passed after the courtroom storm settled. The lake went back to being quiet, the way it used to be before Karen and her army of contractors invaded. But things weren't quite the same anymore. They were better. Where there had once been a battlefield of arrogance and paperwork, there was now peace, laughter, and life again. Families arrived on weekends, boats came and went, kids chased each other along the docks. My island, the same one my grandfather had bought half a century ago, was alive in a whole new way. Every time I set foot there, I could still feel him. My grandfather, a simple man with calloused hands and a quiet pride in the land he'd worked for. He used to say, "Land doesn't belong to you, son. You belong to it. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." He'd have laughed his old fisherman's laugh if he could have seen what the HOA tried to pull. And he'd have been even prouder to see how it all ended. The cabins became a success story. After the settlement, once the HOA started officially renting the island under our agreement, something incredible happened. The place turned into a local gem. At first, I thought it'd just be a way to earn back what they'd taken. But soon I realized it was becoming something much more. Local families started booking the cabins for summer holidays. Out-of-towners came in for fishing trips, kayaking adventures, and weekend retreats. We even had small wedding parties request the lakeside cabins for private ceremonies. The HOA, to their credit, learned their lesson. Under new leadership, they treated the property with respect. Maintenance teams made sure everything stayed clean, safe, and environmentally friendly. They handled the guests, the bookings, and the finances, while I handled ownership, land taxes, and long-term care of the island itself. It was a partnership, one built not on arrogance, but on mutual benefit. Still, there were moments when I'd look across the water and remember the chaos. I'd picture the barges unloading illegal construction materials, the foreman confidently hammering away while believing they had permits. I'd hear Karen's voice echoing in my head, that smug tone saying, "Your little patch of dirt is finally being put to good use." And I'd just smile, because the same cabin she'd bragged about now had my name on the ownership papers. The same docs she claimed for the HOA now carried my lease agreements. That's what justice looks like sometimes. Quiet, poetic, and deeply satisfying. The money was good too. I'll be honest, the lease payments weren't small. Between that and the tourism income, the island practically paid for itself. But for me, it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about making it mean something. So I decided to do what my grandfather would have done, give back. I reached out to a local wildlife conservation group that had been struggling for funding. Together, we created a small summer program for kids, Lake Guardians. Every summer, 50 kids from nearby towns come to the island for free to learn about fishing, boating safety, ecology, and respect for nature. We teach them how to fish, how to kayak, and most importantly, how to understand the lake and protect it. The cabins that once symbolized greed and arrogance now echoed with laughter, learning, and community. Every year, we host a small festival, Lake Day, to celebrate the lake's history and the families who helped preserve it. There's food, music, games, and even a slideshow of the island's journey, from family land to court battle to community retreat. And the best part? The HOA sponsors it. They provide refreshments, volunteers, and decorations. The very same organization that once tried to steal my land now helps fund its preservation. Talk about a full circle moment. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lake gold, I sat on the dock with Robert, my attorney and old friend. He handed me a cold drink, looked out at the cabins glowing in the sunset, and said, "You know, you could have walked away. Most people would have sold it or burned it down just to make a point. But you turned it into something worth keeping." I smiled. Karen wanted to turn it into a resort. "Guess she got her wish, just not the way she expected," Robert chuckled. "Yeah, except now the resort pays you." We sat there for a while, watching a couple of boats pull in as families arrived for the weekend. The sound of laughter drifted over the water. It hit me then. How crazy it was that all this chaos, all this drama had somehow led to something good. Of course, not everyone moved on easily. A few months after the settlement, I got an anonymous letter in the mail. No return address, just one line written in messy handwriting. "You ruined everything for us. Hope you're proud. No signature, but I didn't need one." I knew exactly who it was from. I didn't reply. Didn't need to, because while Karen's world had fallen apart, mine had finally fallen into place. She'd gambled with someone else's legacy and lost everything trying to own something that was never hers. Years later, when people ask me about the HOA cabin story, I tell it like a legend, not out of arrogance, but as a lesson. It's not about revenge. It's about patience, because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or suing. It's waiting, letting arrogance dig its own hole, and then walking in calmly with the truth. I tell people, if someone thinks they own what's yours, don't fight their noise. Fight with your proof. The truth doesn't shout. It just stands tall when everything else collapses. Today, my island stands stronger than ever. The cabins are fully booked most weekends. Families paddle across the lake laughing, and kids chase fireflies at dusk. The lake reflects the lights from the cabins like stars scattered on the water. Sometimes I walk down to the old sign, still the same one Karen installed years ago. "Welcome to Lakeview HOA Cabins." I never took it down. People often ask why. I tell them, because it reminds me of two things: how far arrogance can go, and how easily the truth can take it all back. It's not just a sign anymore. It's a trophy. A quiet reminder that justice doesn't always come in anger. Sometimes it comes in peace, rent checks, and a lake full of laughter. When I lock up the cabins at night, I often pause and look up at the sky. the same sky my grandfather must have watched decades ago. I think about everything that's changed, and everything that hasn't, because in the end, it wasn't just about winning a court case or teaching a Karen a lesson. It was about protecting something worth keeping. And as I hear the water lapping against the dock, I smile, knowing that the island that almost got stolen ended up becoming something even greater than before. A legacy, a victory, and a home, exactly as my grandfather intended. And that wraps up another unbelievable story from the world of HOA madness. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because here at HOA Story Files, we dive deep into the craziest neighborhood dramas, courtroom showdowns, and justice served right where it's due. New stories drop every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, this is HOA Story Files, where every rule breaker eventually gets exposed.